it is time to talk about Give Up the Night, which is the sequel to Draw Down the Moon, which is also the title of the duology, written by Cast and her daughter Kristin Cast. I read Draw Down the Moon previously as an ARC. I have a dedicated review on my channel under the playlist for ARC reviews. I also got Give Up the Night as an ARC, and so this is going to go under ARC reviews, which you probably already know if you're watching this, or it doesn't matter if you don't know. Anyway, you're already watching it, so whatever. If you want a more detailed discussion and review of Give Up the Night, then go over to my Patreon, where I have like a full ranty video like as I'm reading the book over there. I will also have a detailed and much more organized written review over on Medium, which will also have some degree of spoilers to it. And if you want to see me give a specific book a similar treatment, on my Patreon under tier 3, you can actually request reviews. So go check that out if you're interested in seeing me review a more specific title. Just assume going into this video that there will be spoilers for Draw Down the Moon, because it's kind of hard to talk about a sequel without the context of the previous book. Anyway, so this book focuses on Ren and Lee in two different situations, plots, arcs. Ren joins forces with an air elemental who goes by the name Viento, as well as her friends Lily and Ruby, and they follow a map in this magic book to get to a place where they can complete this important ritual, and on the way they face elemental trials. At the same time, Lee has grown suspicious of Celeste and Rottingham, who he has like trusted and followed all this time. And he starts kind of looking into stuff on his own, and he finds information about what his sister was doing when she died that is relevant to Ren, and so becomes his goal to get this information to Ren. So that's like the general overview of the book without getting into the actual like details and spoilers of it. For just general points, I have a whole list written down here of just general talking points. This might be a little chaotic. I'm going to try and keep it organized, but stick with me. There's the elemental trials. I like the idea of elemental trials. I think that's a cool concept. I think that's a great way to structure that portion of the story, because it makes sense that the characters have to travel to somewhere, and so this gives something for the characters to do without it necessarily feeling like filler. The issue is that it's not executed properly. To have a series of trials like this, it shouldn't feel like just random obstacles or like issues with the environment and the terrain, which is what it does feel like in this book. And rather, it should feel like each trial is a direct challenge to one of the characters' like flaws or weaknesses, and therefore each trial is a specific moment of character growth. And I get the impression that that's what the authors intended, or well, what Cast intended, because she wrote those scenes in the book. She wrote Ren's chapters, and all of those trials are in Ren's chapters. Like, we're told that the characters have grown through these trials and they've learned things about themselves, but we're really not shown that. Like, I don't get that impression at all when reading the scenes, and it doesn't really feel like each trial is specific to each character. Ruby, in particular, I don't feel like any of the trials were really theirs to overcome. We're told one is, but again, the way it is executed on page does not feel like that at all. That just feels like a pretty huge missed opportunity in terms of how the story is structured, because that's a huge chunk of the book that we could have been spending all of that time developing these characters, and we just really didn't. Going back to Ruby not really having a trial that they overcome, it's also an issue that Ruby just in general is not treated well in this book. Like, bearing in mind the context that in the first book, Ruby is barely present. They have dialogue in all of 7 chapters in the first book, and the first book is like 33 chapters long or something. And that's just, when I say Ruby has dialogue in 7 chapters, I just mean Ruby says at least one thing in 7 chapters. So they really aren't present in the first book. And then in this book, I was kind of, on some level, hopeful, because they were going with Ren for these trials and going on this journey. So I'm like, okay, well, Ruby's going to be present a whole lot, so like maybe Ruby will get to actually be a character. But there's just really not much done with them. Like, they don't get their own trial to overcome. There's a scene where, without getting into specifics, characters have these like visions of people they've lost. Like each character sees someone important to them that died and gets to have a moment with that person. Ren sees her best friend Sam. Lily sees her grandmother, who she says died just 2 years before. Ruby sees their cat. Just their cat. Not someone they can have a conversation with. Not someone they, like, I understand cats are, like, important. Like, I've lost a cat before and it was devastating. But, like, if I had this life-changing vision along with two of my other friends, and my friend was like, oh, I saw my closest friend who died 2 days ago, and my other friend was like, yeah, I saw one of my really, really close relatives who's been with me for my whole life and was super important to me, and I'm like, I saw my cat. And just overall, Ruby really doesn't get any, like, they have no backstory, they have no character arc, they have no personal goals or fears or motives. They're really just there to be the pragmatic one with survival skills while they're on this journey through the elemental realm of elementals in the woods. And they're the one with super strength and super speed. They're the physically capable one. And that's really their only role in this book. They don't feel like they get to be a person and a character. And this is made so much worse by the fact that Ruby is misgendered constantly. I counted individual instances of the incorrect pronouns being used. Ruby is referred to with she, her pronouns 41 times. I know this is an arc. I know there's going to be errors. I know there's going to be little slip-ups and typos and things that you miss. But 41 pronoun errors for the only non-binary character in the series. So the only on-page queer character, the only on-page non-binary character, and also the only character who gets misgendered. I can't recall a single instance of anyone else having the incorrect pronouns used, but with Ruby it happens 41 times. Ridiculous. Ruby also randomly speaks Japanese a couple times. That was a big problem in the first book. It has toned down in this one. I think there was 2, maybe 3 instances of it. But, like, it's still, like, it was still weird because it was in situations where everyone else was speaking English and it didn't necessarily feel like it made sense. There's one moment where I could maybe give it a pass, but given the past context, I don't think so. Then jumping to Lee's section of the story, the biggest issue with Lee, he got to have agency in this book. He got to do stuff, which is miles better than where he was in the first book, where he just was sad and whined for his very limited number of pages. He is also a much smaller part of this book compared to Ren. Again, he has, I think it's 8 chapters and Ren narrates 17. So still staggering difference between how much of a role these two main characters have in this dual POV story. But Lee's biggest issue is that he, for the most part, he just kind of stumbles into things. Like, he accidentally overhears information, or he tries to accomplish something, can't figure it out, and then while lamenting that he has failed, the solution falls in front of him. There's 2 instances. I'll try to talk about them vaguely because I do want to give kind of examples, but I don't want to give spoilers. There's one incident where it relates to him trying to find out, like, stuff about his sister, and he can't find the information. And the way he finds it is happenstance. He happens to notice something is off and investigates it. But this is after he has been like, oh, I can't find anything, I've failed. It feels accidental and unintentional. And this is in a context where it would have felt more earned and meaningful if the way that he found a solution to this issue was in thinking about his sister and thinking about what he knows about her and her behaviors and how she handles things, realizing where this thing he's looking for must actually be. But we don't get that. We really don't get much information about his sister at all. I still can't tell you much of anything of substance about Maya, even though this is clearly a character that is supposed to haunt the narrative. She's just like a plot point. Another example of something that frustrated me with Lee is Lee was doing a spell that required a specific like ingredient or component, and I, while reading the scene, immediately clocked that he could not access the component he needed based on the description of the environment. And he starts performing the spell, gets to the stage of the spell where he needs that ingredient, and is like, oh, I can't get it. Me as a reader, I'm like, you're dumb. How did you not notice that? You literally described it to me. But also, the way he comes upon the solution is he just cries. And again, without getting into spoiling, him crying solves the problem. And I'm like, okay, it would have been way cool. This could have been a moment of ingenuity for him. Like, I can think of an example of what he could have done to possibly access this thing he needed. I do talk about this more specifically in the longer review, I'm pretty sure. He just doesn't try to find an alternative at all. He accidentally finds one by giving up and crying. And that's just kind of the theme of Lee's section of the book, and it's really frustrating and also boring. Because even when he fails, I'm like, okay, well, fucking something's gonna stumble into him and reveal itself. And like literally every single obstacle he encounters, that's how it's resolved. Another huge issue that plagues the story as a whole is the magic system. The magic system just isn't explained. And it would be fine if it stuck to what was primarily introduced in the first book, which was there's the astrological abilities of the Moonstruck, which is like Aquarius moons can heal and Taurus moons are super smart, and Leo moons are emotional manipulation, and Scorpio moons have like super strength. If it just like that stuff, sure, fine, that works. And then they also are supposed to be able to manipulate the elements. That's completely forgotten in this book. There's multiple instances where I'm like, use your elemental abilities, and the characters don't. And I'd gotten about 75% of the way through the book and finally realized like, oh, that's just not gonna exist in this book, even though it was kind of emphasized in the first book. Like there's a pretty dramatic, there's some pretty dramatic scenes involving people manipulating the elements. It just doesn't exist here. All right. So if it had stuck to those parameters of magic, I would have been like, okay-ish. But there's a whole bunch of spells in this book. I've read the entire book now, and I still have no clue how spells work. Because there's some spells we're told are simple spells, but they do things that seem like a pretty big deal. And there's other things that we're told are complex spells, but they're like really easy and require almost nothing. Like I can think of a spell that I thought would have been really difficult and like a huge deal to do. And it literally just involves a character waving their hands around and it does the thing. And I'm like, that's it? That's all you had to do? And like there's a super important spell that like involves a super important plot thing, and it's just some ingredients and you recite a thing and then it works. And I'm like, I feel like this should have been a lot bigger. It's also fundamentally unclear at any point in the story what the cost of magic is. Sometimes characters get tired, but it never matters beyond the immediate scene where they're using their magic. So nothing feels like there's like a risk or a cost or a limit. And that makes just any scene involving magic feel kind of like it's just going to do what the author needs it to do, and I shouldn't really think about it. Which is just annoying, particularly because I can tell this isn't supposed to be a soft magic system, because you can write books with a soft magic system and like lots of things aren't explained or made clear, or you could even argue that things are inconsistent because they're unclear, but that's just how the magic is presented. And it is consistently inconsistent, like that's the point. But this is, like, I can tell this is supposed to be a relatively hard magic system, but it just never explains itself, and it's so inconsistent, and like the distinction between simple and complex spells is so inconsistent that it might as well not exist. Magic is such an important part of the story, not only in terms of the world building, but also in terms of the plot, that having that be such a critical issue and such a huge hole is like it ruins the reading experience, in my opinion, because I spend so much time in the book being like, okay, well, if this is possible, why don't you just do this earlier? Or wait, but you did this before, so why can't you do this now? Or what do you mean you can do that? So that's like a huge detriment to the story, is that the magic system just does not make any sense. This is like a small one, but also, in my opinion, like it's a consistent issue that, again, kind of plagues the story. This time in terms of writing, pop culture references, really inopportune pop culture references at moments where it super should not be happening. Like, I can remember a scene where, without getting to spoilers, characters are falling and they think they're gonna die, and Ren makes an Aladdin reference? And I'm like, girl. Like, very consistently it is happening at moments that it should be dramatic or tense or scary, but she just pulls out a pop culture reference, and I'm like, okay, well, that just completely killed the mood. And then another, like, really fundamental issue with the book, again, sorry, I'm all over the place and a little scattered, the characters are just really flat. I don't feel like any of these characters really had their own personal motives outside of Ren and, I guess, Lee. And like the villains. Well, Celeste anyway. I don't feel like any of the characters had real motives or goals or fears. I don't feel like any of the characters had chemistry together, either as friends or as couples. And I don't... There's moments where there's supposed to be like reveals or betrayals relating to specific characters, but they fall completely flat in terms of like shock factor or like emotional response, at least for me, because I'm like, okay, well, this character is so poorly established that I don't even care, let alone can I begin to try to unpack or examine their motives or like how this came to be. I'm just sort of like, oh, okay, I guess they're doing that. Because again, none of the characters are well established enough for me to feel like I have a grasp on why they would do what they're doing outside of like I understand Lily and Ruby are doing things to support Ren. I understand Luke was doing things to support Lee. And that's like about as far as those characters' motivations go in terms of what I see in the text. And this is, again, also an issue with the relationships. Like, Ren and Lee are supposed to have this really deep bond. They're supposed to be super close friends. They've known each other for years, and then being apart is really hard. And Ren calls Lee her North Star and all this stuff. And I'm like, I feel like these guys are about as close and well bonded as like someone I used to see on my bus route all the time when I took the bus to work. We saw each other a lot. We would make niceties. We would say hi when we saw each other. But like, I'm not like, I don't have like a soul deep bond to that person, even though I saw them most days for over a year. Like, that's kind of how the relationships between these characters feel. It's like, sure, I guess you've spent a lot of time together, but I don't feel like that matters in a deep way, which is a big problem, especially because this is a romantasy. But one, there's no chemistry in the romance, and I don't feel like the characters have any kind of meaningful bond or connection. They're together because the book decided they're together. And two, there's very little romance in this book. Like, even the moment where, I don't consider this a spoiler because it's the final book in a romantasy duology, but Ren and Lee reunite and there's a kiss. But it's literally like, I put my arms around him and he pulled me close and we kissed and it was amazing and he was my North Star, and like, that's the kiss. Like, what the way I narrated that is pretty much how it's narrated in the text. There's no physicality to it, there's no chemistry, there's no emotion or heat, or like, there's nothing. We're just told they kissed and it was important, which overall is a huge problem in the book, is telling instead of showing. There's so many scenes where I'm like, oh, I guess that happened. It didn't feel like it happened, but I've been told it happened, so I guess that's the case. And it just, like, the whole book felt like just really flat and empty and like devoid of any real people or connections or tangibility. Lastly, this book just kind of ends. There's some really huge major changes that are supposed to have happened. There's a giant loose thread at the end of the book, and neither of those things are addressed. We never actually see on page the change that has been brought by these characters' actions. We just take their word for it, I guess. And like, this really, I was turning the final page. I mean, I wasn't turning, I was turning the final page because it was on my phone. But I was turning the final page and I really felt like, oh, there's gonna be an epilogue. And there just wasn't. The book just ended. And I'm like, oh, so we just, we just don't see any of this. I have so many questions about what these changes actually mean, but I guess that doesn't get answered. I guess that wasn't important. Overall, this book, it was not well written. The plot was not well executed. The framework of the story was great. Just the skeleton idea of like what the book's about and and like how that would be structured is great. I think that had the potential to work really well. But the execution just did not work. So many opportunities for character growth that just weren't used. So many opportunities for world building that was just never explored. The writing was just very ineffective, did not work well, from both writers for different reasons, but the same outcome. I often felt like I was being told things. The world building and the magic system have so many, like, I just have so many questions about them, and there's so many things that don't make sense, or maybe they would make sense if they were actually explored or explained or expanded on in some way. But I'm just left being like, I guess that's a thing because the book needed it to be a thing. And then on top of all that, if this book was just poorly executed, maybe I could have given it a 2. But Ruby gets misgendered 41 times. So I cannot, in good conscience, give this more than a 1 star. Also, an important note, this is a very random little detail, and it's not technically like problematic or harmful, but it is a choice. And I know PC Cast knows what she did because I've read Destined in the House of Night series. So she's aware of what this term means. The characters, for reasons, can't say the word ritual. And so the thing they land on, instead of saying, I don't know, task or homework or goal or whatever, the term they land on is our word. They censor themselves by saying they say our word instead of ritual. I know PC Cast knows that our word is a euphemism for a slur, because that term is used in Destined as a precursor to an ableist tirade from Aphrodite. So I know PC Cast knows what that word means, or what that term is a euphemism for. So that's a fucking choice I don't like, and I don't know why anyone allowed that. Maybe that'll be changed in the final print, but the fact that it was done at all is kind of, the fact that it was done at all and made it to this stage of the book where it's being put out as arcs is like, girl. Anyway, those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please do the like, comment, subscribe thing. If you made it this far, what should we do for an emoji? I guess a moon emoji probably makes the most sense. Put a moon emoji if you made it to the end of the video, and thank you for watching.